will be chaired by Professor K. Jayachandran, School of Bioscience, Mahatma Gandhi University. I invite you, sir, to the session.
A very good morning to all the participants. Now we are in the last day of the academic carnival, and I think this is the first academic session. Academic carnival, I think we started from 17th, now it is the third day. We all know this is the first of kind in the state of Kerala, an academic carnival being organized by a university. There are 7 venues. There are cultural exhibitions, there are book fair, there are academic debates. So many activities, academic activities in one event. And I'm sure now this will be remembered forever, not only because of the exhibitions, not only because of the book fair, not only because of the cultural activities, but because of the discussions made on some very selected, relevant academic topics. Today we will be discussing on question of academic autonomy in institutions of higher learning. For this we have eminent speakers with us, Professor M.V. Narayanan sir, Vice Chancellor Sri Sankara University of Sanskrit Kaladi. We have Professor Zoya Hasan from JNU. We have Professor G. Arunima from KCHR. So I invite all the participants to this section. I'm sure now this will be of very good interaction in nature. So with this introduction, I declare that the first session on the third day is being started. Sir, please.
Good morning, all. Respected Professor K. Jayachandran, Professor in the School of Biosciences, MGU University. Main speakers of the day, Professor Zoya Hasan, Professor M.V. Narayanan, Professor G. Arunima, Sri Baburaj Warrior, JR, MG University. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome and introduce the speakers, the distinguished speakers of the day, who are going to talk to us on the topic, the question of academic autonomy of institutions of higher learning. This is a subject we should all be deeply concerned, being people involved in the field of higher education in various capacities. These are challenging times for the institutions of higher learning, trying to respond to the forces of globalization, technology change, changing expectations from students and public, competition for global rankings and prestige, need for enhanced mobilization of financial resources, and so forth. To face these multifaceted challenges of the 21st century and provide desired academic outcomes to students and society, the universities must be governed itself effectively. Creating successful universities needs a supportive governance structure in which they have freedom to achieve their objectives, whether teaching or research. However, what is going on around us does not reflect our hopes and desires. The higher education institutions are challenged from various corners using different tools and techniques, be it NEP, the countless number of reports, orders, circulars coming out from the regulatory agencies or the regulatory authorities. The fast-growing forces against institutional autonomy demand an urgent response. It could have been a big disappointment if we don't discuss it here in this academic carnival. Three eminent professors will talk to us in this morning on this very issue. Professor Zoya Hasan is one of our distinguished guests of the day. She is an academic par excellence and a political scientist. She holds a PhD from Pennsylvania State University, US. At present, Professor Hasan is a National Fellow, Indian Council of Social Science Research. She is a former Professor of Political Science and the Dean of School of Social Sciences at Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, and a former member of the National Commission for Minorities. Professor Hasan's work has focused on the state, political parties, ethnicity, gender, and minorities in India and the society in North India. Known for her path-breaking work on the politics of Uttar Pradesh, she has also undertaken extensive research on the social and education aspects of Indian Muslims and Muslim women in particular. Her interest in Indian government and politics, the state party system, political mobilization, minority rights, and gender studies are reflected in her various research studies and many books she has authored. Professor Zoya Hasan, having spent almost her entire career, has contributed immensely to the field of higher education in India in various capacities. It gives us great pleasure to have you with us today. She will make a presentation on the topic Academic Freedom, Institutional Autonomy, and the Critical Role of Universities in Indian Democracy. Please join me to welcome Professor Zoya Hasan. Let us welcome our next speaker, Professor M.V. Narayanan, Vice Chancellor, Sri Shankaracharya University of Sanskrit, Kaladi, who will respond to the presentation by Professor Zoya Hasan. A native of Thrissur, Professor Narayanan has an extensive teaching experience of over 3 decades, including 13 years of service as a professor. He was professor and head of the Department of English, Calicut University, and director of the School of Languages. He was the dean of the Department of Foreign Languages and a member of the Academic Council of Sri Shankaracharya Sanskrit University previously. He also worked as a sub-editor of Indian Express Daily, and he also worked as a visiting professor in many Indian and foreign universities. He has published over 60 articles and 7 books in English and Malayalam. He has also been associated with the theatre since 1985. Professor M.V. Narayanan, having been spent almost his entire career in the field of higher education, is certainly befitting to talk about the autonomy of institutions of higher learning and respond to the presentation of Professor Zoya Hasan. On behalf of this gathering, I welcome Professor M.V. Narayanan. Professor G. Arunima, Director KCHR, will also respond to the presentation by Professor Zoya Hasan. She had her post-graduation from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, and took MPhil and PhD from University of Cambridge, UK. She conducted research in different aspects of social and religious life in India. Besides that, she is also interested in gender, in photography, and visual practices in contemporary India. She started her professional career as a lecturer in history at Lady Sri Ram College, University of Delhi, and switched to Center for Women's Studies, School of Social Sciences, Jawaharlal Nehru University, and later became a professor there. She was a scholar in residence or a visiting professor in many Indian and foreign universities. She has published many articles, papers, monographs, and books, and translated some, and secured several national and international awards during her career. She also held several positions in government and academic bodies. Being a person who spent decades in the field of higher education as a teacher as well as a researcher and held impressive positions, she has a great understanding of our topic of discussion today. I am pleased to welcome her to this gathering. Professor K. Jayachandran is the chairman of this session. He is the professor in the School of Biosciences, MGU University, a dynamic professor indeed. I have personal contact with him for the last 10 or 15 years. I also welcome Professor K. Jayachandran to this gathering. Sri Baburaj Warrior, Joint Registrar, MG University, will deliver the vote of thanks for this session. I also welcome Sri Baburaj Warrior into this gathering. Finally, I welcome the syndicate members, university officers, students, and others who are present here to this interesting session. Thank you all.
In the beginning, I mentioned Eunoia 23 is unique. Why it is unique? Because it addresses the most recent challenge, I would say, in the field of education. Now, how well you can transform education. We talk much about startups, we talk much about knowledge economy. We can continue talking on these issues maybe for a greater length of time. But how can you implement it? How can you implement it in a state like Kerala? How effectively you can transform school education, college education, and university education. So these challenges are being taken as the objectives of Eunoia 2023. And through the various events of Eunoia 23, we are trying our level best to bring this message to the society. And Eunoia 23 is also projecting one important message that Mahatma Gandhi University has started its movement in this direction. So it is in this context, we have a very hot issue of academic autonomy in higher education institutions. Now, to begin the discussion on the subject, let me exactly define what is actually, what is actually meant by this academic autonomy. It's a degree of self-governance necessary for effective decision-making by institutions of higher education regarding their academic work standard, management, and related activities. No, it is very easy to say academic autonomy. It is very easy to say that we have the universities of Kerala is having academic autonomy, but we generally represent academic autonomy with respect to curriculum designing, revision, and nothing else. But academic autonomy is having a very extended meaning. When you make a very close approach on academic autonomy, It has its connection deeply rooted in financial management. It has its connection deeply rooted in governance. It has its connection deeply rooted in the selection of faculty members, appointment of the other authorities. It has its meaning even to students. Now, students also deserve autonomy. Now, what subject I should take, what kind of startup I should start, where I should study, and all those things are coming under the broad meaning of academic autonomy. So I hope there will be much more enlightenment in this academic autonomy. We have very efficient speakers with us. ഒരു കാര്യം കൂടി ഞാൻ പറയാൻ ആഗ്രഹിക്കുകയാണ്. ഈ അക്കാഡമിക് ഓട്ടോണോമി എന്ന വിഷയത്തിൽ ഇവിടെ ചർച്ച നടക്കുമ്പോൾ കഴിഞ്ഞ 3 ദിവസം നടന്ന ചർച്ചയുടെ തുടർച്ചയായിട്ട് തന്നെ പറയുകയാണ്, നമുക്ക് ഏറ്റവും കൂടുതൽ ഇൻട്രാക്ഷൻ കിട്ടിയത് +2 കഴിഞ്ഞ സ്റ്റുഡൻസിൽ നിന്നാണ്. So that is great. Students from after +2 or who are there in the +2 class, they have interacted very effectively with us. So this is also a platform for the students. നിങ്ങൾ തീർച്ചയായിട്ടും മുന്നോട്ട് വരണം. ഏറ്റവും നല്ല പ്രൊഫസർമാരാണ് നമ്മുടെ മുമ്പിലുള്ളത്. നിങ്ങളുടെ സംശയങ്ങൾ അവരോട് ചോദിക്കണം. ആ കിട്ടുന്ന ഉത്തരങ്ങൾ ഒരുപക്ഷെ നിങ്ങളുടെ ഭാവിയിലേക്കുള്ള വലിയ വഴികളായിരിക്കും തുറന്നു തരിക. So with these small words, I invite respected Professor Zoya Hasan from JNU for starting the discussion. Thank you, madam.
Professor Jayachandran, Professor Paul, Professor Narayanan, and Professor Arunima, and friends, colleagues, students. It's a great pleasure to be present here and to participate in this conference, and many thanks to the organizers for inviting me to speak on this very important subject of academic autonomy in higher learning. It's indeed a great privilege to participate and speak at the Mahatma Gandhi University's Global Academic Carnival, which clearly looks to be a very important academic cultural event of the university, which attracts people from everywhere. Okay, so as was just said a little while ago, I'm going to speak on academic freedom, institutional autonomy, and the critical role of universities. Public universities are important everywhere, but its importance in India cannot be overstated, as education in private universities is expensive and beyond the reach of most students. No matter how we judge the education system in independent India, public universities did provide access to higher education to a large number of people of varied social backgrounds. It is the only site in contemporary India where all major social groups come together in more or less egalitarian conditions. Its failures are many, most notably its inadequacy of coverage and, of course, the quality of education, which has been declining, especially in state universities. However, the fact remains that public universities have tried to promote education as a public good with the widest possible reach. Public universities provide access to students. Okay, is that all right? Is that all right? Okay. Public universities provide access to students from all sections, more so for students from disadvantaged backgrounds who have hitherto been unable to access it. Despite the rapid expansion of private institutions, it is public universities that over the decades have contributed to the expansion and democratization of higher education. However, the whole public university system is being weakened by the new stress on private education and private universities. Despite rising enrollment, there's a stagnation in public expenditure on higher education as a proportion of gross domestic product. Public universities, as we know, are facing the brunt of budgetary cuts. The overall allocation of education has simply not increased significantly. It has not gone beyond 3 to 4% of the total expenditure, when decades back it was envisaged that it would go up to 6%. This has increased the private sector's involvement in higher education, but most private institutions offer education in only a few disciplines, mainly engineering, medicine, and management. The humanities and social sciences do not receive the attention they deserve in these institutions. Also, private universities by and large exclude those belonging to non-affluent households from getting into them. These institutions do not have reservations in the constitutional sense of the term, but for payment seats. The students who get into payment seats look at education as a way of making money in future and not with a commitment to learning and widening one's horizons. Public universities have been criticized for poor infrastructure, ranging from overcrowded hostels to stinking toilets to inadequate and technologically under-equipped classrooms. However, that does not seem to deter students from across the country flocking to take admission in public institutions. And thanks to continued expansion of reservations in higher education, the class, caste, and gender profile of students, not the faculty to the same extent, has changed and is much more heterogeneous and diversified than before. Now, this is important because social diversity also brings in new strands of thought in campuses. A new generation of academics is coming up from subaltern ranks, from leading public universities. This has helped in building cultural and intellectual capital among the ranks of the marginalized, especially Dalits. However, the focus of Indian education is changing after the rise and expansion of economic liberalization and majoritarian politics. The direction that higher education in India is now slated to take represents the convergence of the interests of neoliberalism and Hindu nationalism. The far-reaching changes being wrought by this combination will have a long-term bearing on higher education. The current regime is taking further the neoliberal policies that were introduced by the Congress-led United Progressive Alliance government. However, some of those policies were more on the drawing board. They were not really fully implemented. And in fact, they faced considerable opposition from within the UPA and outside it. The deregulation of higher education sector has been greatly accelerated in the past few years, with the push being given to private universities as alternatives to public universities. Academic freedom. One of the principal issues at the center of public debate concerns academic freedom and academic autonomy of institutions. Academic freedom is essential for the production of knowledge. It is essential because universities are places for raising doubts and asking questions about everything. Academic freedom refers to the freedom of scholars to conduct critical inquiry, for teachers and students to engage with society, to collectively deliberate on any idea without fear of sanctions, censure, or illegitimate interference. It protects the space for contestation and scrutiny where knowledge is produced. Now, curbs on academic freedom, however, prevents intellectuals from playing their expected role in pursuing critical inquiry and new ideas. This can lead to the creation of a climate of fear in which intellectuals will hesitate to express dissenting views. The present dispensation at the center is apprehensive of intellectuals, universities, and students who think independently, leave alone critically. It has been active in trying to impose its own views on many academic institutions, consequently compromising academic autonomy. It is eager to control universities both at the central and state level with a premium on conformity and dubious, if not obsolete, knowledge. This approach has no place for liberal thinking and educational institutions that question such knowledge. Universities are perceived as a threat because they are raising inconvenient questions. Interestingly, barring the brief period of the emergency from 1975 to 77, academic freedom in independent India, by and large, was not seriously throttled by the state, at least as far as central universities were concerned. There are no instances of seminars being monitored, academic books being banned, or the imprisonment of public intellectuals and academics for holding certain views. However, it is well known that covert and overt pressures on academic institutions by governments of different political parties were commonplace in state universities. As it began to lose its dominance, the then ruling party, the Congress Party, had also started becoming increasingly unprincipled and randomly interventionist. But there was really no major threat to academic freedom, which is much more at risk now than before. And the political assault on academic institutions has grown after 2014. Hence, there's a rise in the tendency of the government to control institutional autonomy through coercive methods and promotion of unscientific views. Now, this is reflected in the sharp downward decline in India's position in the Academic Freedom Index developed by the We Dem Institute of the University of Gothenburg in Sweden, which is tracking academic freedom in India for the past many decades. This report significantly also shows a precipitous decline in press freedom in India, paralleling the decline in academic freedom. Similarly, and importantly, an important report, an Indian report on academic freedom in India, I think authored by Professor Nandini Sundar, along with one of her colleagues, in 2020, documented the diminishing scope in academic freedom, noting that since 2014, and I quote the report, India has seen an unprecedented assault on academic freedom as well as academics. The biggest obstacle is the state interfering with what can be taught or restricting what is taught inside the classroom. Now, the challenge is sharpened by the dominant political ideology that has shown a will to conquer all spaces and institutions and impose its own ideas and interpretations on the academy. This is evident from the universities getting transformed into government departments with the imposition of the Central Civil Services Conduct Rules, which means that rules applicable to other civilian employees, i.e. government employees, will now apply to university teachers as well. So teachers in Central University could certainly find themselves in trouble if they were to participate in anti-government protests, and that has indeed happened, as we know, in several central and state universities in the past few years. Now, so apart from the dominant ideology, deepening social intolerance has also intensified attacks on academic freedom. There have been many instances where the government has interfered in the working of higher educational institutions through use of coercive methods. You would recall the Ministry of External Affairs had released guidelines for holding online international conferences, seminars, and activities. Institutions were required to request prior permission if the subject was centered on the security of the Indian state or related to India's internal matters. This directive, however, was later withdrawn following a backlash from scientists and academics. The exclusion of certain important books from university syllabi entirely on non-academic grounds exemplifies this. There's a long list of seminars, lectures, and events that have been cancelled, meetings have been disrupted, publishers have been compelled to withdraw books, and even references to Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru were expunged from textbooks in Rajasthan in 2016. Now, the limitations on academic freedom is sort of paralleled by the limitations on academic autonomy. And academic freedom to flourish requires institutional autonomy, the right of the university